Hello there. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, do you hear
Yeah.
me?
Ooh, let me increase my audio.
It's Victoria here.
Oh, hi, Victoria.
Hi, Luis.
I can see that we have Perry on the call as well, um, but he may not have audio, which is fine. I'll wait 2 more minutes. Few people may join. If they don't join, then I will begin. Thank you for joining. Victoria, I know you was on last week's session, if I'm correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Did you manage to have a look at any videos on there? Or?
yeah, all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, the and also the last one that you sent me yesterday.
Oh, okay.
I watched it again. Yeah.
Cool. Would you consider yourself an expert now, or
Mm, not
no?
really.
Not really? Okay.
I need the basics. So
Okay. No
yeah.
worries. Cool. So yeah, I'll give it 2 minutes and then we'll continue.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so we'll continue. So we'll just begin actually, rather than continuing. So yeah, thank you for joining the call. Today, if you are new to the session, I'm going to take you through Journey Creator. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. If you can't, just mention it or mention it in the chat. But yeah, you may have seen Journey Creator around and you may be wondering how it's been used or what's the benefits of using the platform. But yeah, today will be the day that you will have a enhanced look on the platform. Journey Creator is part of DXP. DXP is not only Journey Creator, DXP contains other products such as Digital Coach and others. But Journey Creator, previously known as Beekeeper, is the main platform of DXP for now. So yeah, this tool is what will be eventually used with clients to integrate with their services and to power their journeys. Okay, so I've basically given you a summary of Journey Creator, but I can give you the bullet points here as a summary. By the end of this session, you should have been given an in-depth overview of App Builder, Data Editor, and Integrate tools. I will clearly explain what App Builder, Data Editor, and Integrate is. Being able to create a fully fledged journey on Journey Creator. Currently, you may have access to different environments that have Journey Creator on them, but for this session, it will just be a show rather than an exercise. Usually, or sometimes I may do it in a exercise format where you will be given exercises and you'll be testing on them. But for now, it'll just be going through the platform, and any questions that you come across or that may arise, please let me know. Part of building your application, and I will clearly explain what an application is, but part of building your application will be building business logic, which is a powerful addition to your journeys, which will be explored. By the end of today, I would have connected to a third-party API, which is pretty fun, and I'll show you how easy it is to do that. You would have understood how Journey Creator fits or will fit into the rest of the platform. And yet the final bullet point may not be relevant, but we will show you, or I will show you how to preview, not to test, we won't be doing any testing today, but how to publish your end-to-end journey as well. Okay, so that's a summary of Journey Creator. Ignore this bit. Normally I'll go through this if we were in a classroom, for example, but any questions, please let me know. Cool. So the first thing, or the first idea that you'll probably have is, how do I even access Journey Creator? You may have heard the term environment. With Journey Creator, there are multiple different environments. Currently, I am using an environment called UAT because we literally just released version 4.2 of Journey Creator. And the environment I was using during UAT is called UAT. How do we know where or how to define an environment? Basically, you'll be given a link to the platform, and in the platform link, you will see a URL. And based on the first word here, it will just be your environment name. So UAT will be your environment for this one. You may see other environments such as QA or testing, depending on the life cycle of the product. But yeah, for now, I'll be using the UAT environment with Journey Creator. A client may eventually spin up their own environments. They can call it whatever they want, but for now, this is how we access Journey Creator. So to do that, I'm actually gonna copy that in and then just hit enter. And then what should happen, if you're already logged in, you should be sent to the first section of Journey Creator called App Builder. Now, that's not really helpful. I do need to log in just to show you how to do that. So I will log out. And the first thing that you will see is the screen. You will be given a password and you'll be given a username. For example, for this environment, my username is test3, and I also have a password assigned to it. But yeah, I mean, once you log in, it's very simple. You'll be sent to this screen called the App Builder section. So what is App Builder? App Builder is basically how you build your app, as in based on the name. What you're seeing here is a blank screen. The white area will be the canvas. On the left-hand side, you have your directory where you can choose between different projects. What is a project? I'll go over a diagram that will make it a lot easier. But yeah, the first thing that you'll see when you log in is the left-hand side, which is the carousel, where you can choose between your projects and applications. On the top, you have your 3 different areas. You have App Builder, Data Editor, and Integrate. On the far right, on the top, you have your settings icon, where you can view the settings of your environment. And on the right, next to that, you do have an option to log out. So as you saw there, I clicked on that button and I logged out. So very simple, log in, log out. On the far left, we have the synchronous logo, but once you click on that logo, you can view the current version of Journey Creator. Now, on there it says 4.2.2, something. It means that this is the version that we're using. It doesn't mean that this is the released version, but currently for the training session, I'm using version 4.2.2. It may mean completely different to the release, so please don't mix the two. Cool. So what I'll do now, I will begin by showing you a diagram to make it a lot easier before I continue. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah, I'm assuming they can.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I did mention a project earlier. What exactly is a project? The best way to view a project in Journey Creator is a folder that groups your applications. A project can have multiple different applications, and from there I'm going to stop. So if I switch back to App Builder, what we have here is our project. You can also assign an image to a project. How do we actually create a new project? I'll show you. To do that, we'll view the settings, which is basically the global settings area for your environment. And the first tab we have here is projects. If I scroll down, we have multiple different projects here for different purposes. Well, I can create new projects now, but I wouldn't actually save it because we already have one. And we will show you by using the same project. But if you were to create new projects...
I have a question, sorry to interrupt you. Are these projects that you just displayed the same as the ones in the directory?
Yes, they are related. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. On the left, if I scroll all the way to the left-hand side, you can choose your project. But yeah, there will be the same list. But yeah, if I was to create a new project, you click on the screwdriver or spanner icon, and then projects, create a new project. I'll call it example. You can optionally give it an image. Throughout the whole Journey Creator application, you will also become familiar with a description option. Currently, for the users of it at the moment, we don't really give it descriptions, but you can if you want to. It's optional. So I wouldn't give it a description now. I'll just cancel. Actually, I'll save it so you can see what happens. It will be added to your project list. But how do we actually select it? If you've probably guessed, we just select it on the carousel. We go all the way to the right-hand side, and then what we have here is our new project. We can use this project, but what I'll do to make it easier, I will delete this project and use another project called DXP training. So to delete, go back to where you were, as in projects in the settings area, and then you scroll down, you can select, not that one, this one, and then delete. Cool. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Now to select another project, you just select through the carousel. Okay, so what we have here is a project called DXP Training, and we have 3 different applications. So yeah, the top level on the left-hand side will be applications. If I switch back to the diagram, as we can see here, applications are nested in projects. We can have multiple different applications, as in we've got 3 here. And applications is basically where you'll build your app. Of course, that may not be enough because we do need to build a journey. So we have to break it down from application to something called a business feature. So what are business features? I would say business features is the aim of your journey. For example, you can create a new business feature called trading. You can create a new business feature called checkout, as in if you had, or if you went in a retail environment and you had items in your cart, you can check out by going through the checkout business feature. So that's basically what a business feature is. Basically blocks that will eventually be broken down by steps, which is the next part, to build your application. On that note of the example of a checkout, creating a new business feature is great, but how do we actually break it down further? How do we actually add data to our journey? The only way to do that is by going to the next section, which will be steps. So steps are basically the building blocks of your application. A step in the checkout feature, for example, will be enter billing details. That could be an example of a step. You could do enter shipping details, send email. But yeah, steps are the building blocks of a feature, and the features are the building blocks of an application. That's basically the hierarchy of a project in Journey Creator. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to create a brand new application, and I will call this one New Starters. Of course, it may not be a new startup, it may just be new to the application, or sorry, the platform. But yeah, it's just an example. And then from now on, what I'm going to do, I'm going to base our journey in this new application called New Starters. All right, so now that we've built on the application, what we need to do next is add a new feature. To do that, all you need to do is hover your mouse on the left-hand side, and what we have here is 3 dots. And once you select it or click on it, we'll have 3 different options here. We can add a new feature. When I click on the plus button, you can give it a name. You can either edit the application itself, or you can remove the application with the trash icon. So I'm going to create a new a new feature called Weather Looker. Now, the whole process of this training is to eventually connect to an API. To make it a bit more interesting, for now, I'm going to show you the actual API that we will be connecting to. And this is called Open Weather Map. We can use multiple different APIs. We can use a playing cards API. We can use product API. But the reason why I'm using an Open Weather Map API or the Open Map Weather API is because it's free, it's quick, it's relatable. The weather's great currently in London, so we can view other areas based on the location. And it's free, especially, as I mentioned. So this is what we'll be using. Eventually, we'll be connected to this API, and then we'll be returning information based on our current location, which is pretty cool. Once we do that, I'll show you how and why it's powerful with the platform. and then we can explore more intermediate and advanced ways to enhance our journey. Okay, so I'm going to create a new feature. Oops, I already did it. So the first feature that we have here is called weather lookup. Now, when I select our new feature, it's completely blank because we do need to create new steps. So if you remember, application, business feature, step. So I'm going to break down weather lookup a bit more, and then I'll create a new step. To do that, you click on the same three dots on the right-hand side, and then we have two options here. We can give it a name, and we can also assign it a template. Now, what are templates in Journey Creator? Basically, we have a front-end client called Lumen, and we can configure our templates in Journey Creator to reflect on a front-end client. I'll show you an example of that now from a completely different application before I go further to show you what I mean. So I'm going to give this step a name called Get Weather. And then I'm going to choose between the options available here. So out of the box, what we have here is two different templates. We have simple form, which is basically a form that can be configured to add a title, a subtitle, and a CTA button, so a submit or continue button. The text can be configured in this template. And the second template that we have out of the box is a CTA-based template. So that way we have an array of buttons that we can configure to the user. A great example of using CTA template would be a decision. So for example, if you wanted to allow the user to choose between upgrading their device or their handset now or later, we can create two new buttons one called now and one called later. And we can configure where it goes in the journey. I'll show you that later. But yeah, out of the box, we have two templates. That may not be enough. An example of that is here. I'm currently working on a demo application called House Kitchen, which will showcase the power of Lumen and Journey Creator. This template is called a proposition list, which basically is a custom template which is built using Angular, as in Angular 6 to be precise, or 7, I can't remember. But yeah, once you build that, anyone with front-end development experience can upload their template into Journey Creator. And then once we do that, we can configure what you're seeing here. So on the top, we have select device, which is the title. This is configured in Journey Creator, and this is also configured in Journey Creator, as in our subtitle. To show you that before I move on, what we have here is, actually, you know what, I'm not going to show you that now because it may be confusing. That application is quite large, but we'll get back to that. But Lumen will look like this, as in, it can look like this, but this is a very basic out of the box template for Lumen, which I've configured based on custom work. This is connected to Journey Creator, and I'll show you how later. Anyway, enough of that. So I'm going to create a new step called Get Weather, and I'll assign it a simple form. Cool. So when I create that, as you can see, we have a nested layout. We've got our application, we've got our feature, then we've got our step. The first thing that you'll see when you create a new step is 3 different accordion tabs, I can call it. The first one will be data profile. The second one will be integration of rules, and the third one will be US configuration. Now, for now, I'm going to get you to forget about integration of rules and forget about US configuration. Now, in order for us to have a working example, what we eventually will need is data. And as you can see here, our data profile is blank. Now, this will take me to the second area of Journey Creator called Data Editor. Before I edit anything here, we will need data. So I'm going to switch at the top from Ad Builder to Data Editor. And as you can see, I mean, it's pretty understandable. It's blank and we do need to add data. So I'm going to create our first new property. But before we do that, I'm going to show you exactly what's on the screen to make it easier. Now, compared to Ad Builder, we have different options. We have an ADM, which is the first tab that you'll be placed on. ADM stands for Application Data Model. Eventually, you will need to imagine our data model as a very large JSON file, which will have configuration based on what we specify here. But this is the most important area of the data editor section. Next to it, we have the ARD, which is the application reference data. You can imagine this place as a static location for your data that wouldn't really change, data that will be shared quite frequently between your features. A great example is that I can create a new list of colors and then use those colors throughout our application. I may be jumping ahead here, but yeah, I'll show you exactly how this works later. In translations, we can also specify translations. We've got many different languages to choose from, as in, rather than the actual language itself, we can choose variants, which is pretty cool, which is also great for clients that are global. We can configure based on different logic, depending on the situation. But yeah, we can also add translations for our model, for our error messages, and also for channels as well, which is pretty cool. In here, we have rules. Rules is a topic that I'm going to get you to forget about for now, but this is where we configure something called rules. And then, as I mentioned, we have our templates in the final tab. We have two templates. I've created a new step called Get Weather, and as you can see, it's picked it up that it's being used. So we can also view if the template is being used, which is pretty cool. On the right-hand side, this is a bit more technical, but if you had a custom template, we can also edit the template after adding it to Journey Creator. If you aren't familiar with this, don't worry. This is a bit more intermediate, but I'll leave that for now. But basically, that is the premise of Data Editor. So Data Editor is where you will edit your data and its properties. Cool. So going back to App Builder, we have our first step, but it's pretty much empty. So I'm going to create a new property. And properties, arrays, objects still work similarly to its programmatical terms. So if you're familiar, a property is a property on an object. An object, you can see it as a folder. It can basically contain properties in the situation. And an array basically associates data, as in it all works similarly to its program term. So don't be afraid to play around with this. But yeah, this is the options that we have here. On the left-hand side, we have show linked and import. I'm going to get you to ignore these two for now. And of course, we have a search bar if our model gets quite large, and it will be for more complex applications. We can also filter our ADM, as in our application data model, by entering information in our search bar. Okay, so enough of the talking on that. I'm going to create a new property called My Location. Eventually, this property or the value on this property will be used with our API. But that'll be later. So for now, what we have here is three different options in properties. We've got a name that we need to configure. We've got a description, which is optional. But the most important thing here will be the type. Now, I'll say for Victoria, yeah, Victoria, I've got a question for you. Now, I'm going to create a new property called My Location.
Okay.
Yeah. But which type would it be? Would it be a string? Would it be a Boolean, a number, an integer?
String, of course.
Okay, so you are pretty I'm going to save it as a string.
Yeah.
As you can see here, we have privacy, we've got tags, we've got validation. Ignore these for now. I'll get back to that, but I'll keep it very simple. So we hit save. Again, another familiar theme. You can also edit properties once you've created it, and you can also delete things as well in Journey Creator. Cool. So now that we've added our first property, we need to switch back to App Builder, and then we need to place this property in our profile. Why do we need to do that? It's because our property can be used anywhere, but if we wanted to specifically use my location in Get Weather, then we need to literally physically move it there. So to do that, what we need to do here is edit. I'm going to click edit, and the first thing that you'll see in your ADM library, which is a reference to the ADM in data editor, will be our new property. So great. We've only got one, so in order for me to move it to our step, I'm going to have to drag and drop. So very simple. You just drag from the right-hand side to the left-hand side of your profile. Cool. We had a little message saying that the entity has been added to the resource. By the way, if you see the term resource, another name for resource is a step. Okay, cool. So we are currently editing our Get Weather step. We created our feature, we created our application. Are we finished? Nope. There are a few more things that we need to do here. So we've added our first property. I'm going to hit save. And then what do I do next step? Now, the second main tab in App Builder will be something called preview. Now, what is preview? Whenever we make a change in our application on here, we always need to select preview to see our changes. Preview itself is preview will give you a preview of our application. So it's very simple. Any changes that we do, we hit preview so we can see them. We even can see them visually, as in we have a visual tool on the right-hand side where we can view our application's content. When I selected preview now, the first thing that you will see is our feature, because we are previewing the application. If I had multiple different features here, they will be displayed here. So I'll show you exactly what I mean. I'm going to create a new feature called feature 2, and I'm going to delete this after. So if I hit preview now, since I've made a change, we can see our new feature. So this view on the right-hand side is basically giving you a breakdown of how your application will function once it's complete. Okay, so I don't need feature 2 for now, so I'm going to delete it. So we select the 3 dots and then remove it. I hit preview again because I made a change. And now we are back to weather lookup. Cool, so the assumption is once I select this feature and click on it, I should see our new step. But we don't. We are told that we do need to go back to features. So what happened? What we should have seen is a new box with a step called weather lookup. But yeah, it didn't come up. I'm going to do it again if you missed that, but yeah, it didn't come up. Okay, so how do we actually see our step, and why don't we see our step after we've added it? Basically, we have another area in our step called integration and rules. So that's the next area that we will configure in order for us to see our step. So I'm going to hit on, oops, let me close this. I'm going to select edit. And then I'll switch to the new tab called integration and rules. Now, another new area here, the first thing that you'll see is create, a box called create, an option called edit, and another option called item. Now, what do they mean? I'll switch back to the PowerPoint. Cool. So, in order for a user to see a step, they need to have the option to create information. So they need to have the option to post new information to our model. So the reason why you did not see the step is because it doesn't have something called a create link. Now, we assign create links to a step in order for the user to post information. They are very similar to REST terms, or they pretty much are REST terms. So a create link is basically a post request. So you post information to the model, which will be used later on. And on the right-hand side here, we have edit. As you saw here, we've got create and edit. Edit will be a put request. So if you are familiar with that, a put request basically updates the model with new data. So without one or two, we cannot, or the user can't really do anything. So there's actually no point to display the step. So as a summary, in order for you to see your step in your journey, you do need to have at least a create or at least an edit link. To be precise, if the user can't really post anything, you do need to have a create link. So in order for the user to view it or to post any information, you do need to have a create link. So I'm going to show you now. I'm going to add a create link. To do that, you just hover over the plus button. And as you can see on the left-hand side, we have a new prompt confirming that we've added a create link. All right, I'm going to hit save. And then let's see if we can now see our step. So I'm going to hit preview because we made a change. And then we view our feature. But now we can see our step because the user now can post information. We also have a property in our step, so we should be able to see that too. So I'm going to click on Get Weather, and great, we can see our new property. Yeah, so that's pretty much how we can allow or enter information into our model. Okay, so now that we have our property, I'm going to enter my location, and I'm currently in London. I'm going to hit submit, and then we are pretty much done. How do we know that we are done? There's no prompt on the right hand side. There may be a very brief prompt that may say done. But yeah, overall, we are done once we have visited all of our create links. So our journey is done once we've visited all of our steps, as in all of our create links that have, all of our steps that have create links. Sorry to confuse you. I'll elaborate on that later on, but for now, basically we are done because we haven't got anything else. We haven't got any more steps. We haven't got any more features. So the journeys are done. One thing here is how do we actually see what we've submitted? On the bottom, we have a tab or a toolbar. And then the first thing we have here is something called state, which is basically the journey state. We can see our current journey here. If I highlight our property, my location, we can see our submission as we've done a post request, so we've actually created something in our model. And then I entered London, so we can see it here. So that's pretty cool. Now let's allow the user to edit. So imagine I wanted to allow the user to add their location, but they can also change it in case they made a mistake. Going back to the PowerPoint, what we can see here, edit allows a user to edit a resource in a data model, and that's basically a put request. So the scenario here is, what if I wanted to allow the user to edit their location? As you probably guessed it, I need to go back into my step. So I'll click on the step on the left-hand side. I click on edit. I switch to integration of rules. And then I click the plus button on edit. And we can hit save. And then we hit preview. So we can see our change, weather lookup, get weather. And then we will enter our location. Cool. Now the step is still available because we have another link or another option on here, which is what we're just adding now, which is allowing the user to edit. You can tell this by looking at the icon. You can see a pencil icon confirming that the user can now edit this step. Okay, so I'm going to click on that. And then Great, we have our submission, which has been pre-populated from our state. So we can change this location. I'm going to pretend I'm in Hawaii, and I'll hit submit. And if I view my state, we can see that our new property, so our new value has been updated. My location now is saying Hawaii. So that's basically how a user can edit their submission in the journey. All they need to do is have a edit link available on their step. Cool. Now let's move back to the PowerPoint. So let me go back a bit. So what we've just done now is a summary. We're creating a new project. We're creating an application. We have different business features, and then we have multiple different steps. Or do we? We've only got one step, and we've only got one feature. So I'm going to leave it as it is for now, and then I'll show you something. So with our current journey in our preview, we still can see the step. If you remember, a journey is not done until all of the steps have been visited or validated. So I'm going to change the location again because it's still giving me the option to. I'm going to pretend I'm in Tokyo. I hit submit and it's changed. Now I can do this forever. Basically, the user will only see this until something happens. If I've given the option for the user to create something, that means they've posted, which is done. But I'm also giving the user an option to edit something, which basically means that they can edit and edit and edit and edit and edit. But how do I actually tell it to stop? As in, where do I set the criteria? How many times does the user have to edit? Because if I don't add anything towards this edit link or this create, if I don't add any condition towards this edit link, the user will be stuck on this step forever. As in, pretty much that. So let's pretend that we are in a checkout and the users enter their billing details, they've entered their name, you're giving them an option to edit their name in case they made a mistake. They hit submit, but they are taken back to the same step. They can't move on to shipping details, for example. How do we stop that from happening? So another area in your step will be, in integration of rules, will be a precondition. You probably saw it earlier. We have our links on the left-hand side, but under it we have a box or a field specifying a precondition. It's empty now because we haven't added anything, but basically, in order for the user to stop editing their property, they will need to have a precondition defined. What do I mean? A precondition basically validates if a link is available or not. So in other words, if I want to say, stop this edit link if the user is in London, I need to add a precondition to do that. And what do I mean by doing that? I'm going to show you now. So what I just did there, I edited the step when I clicked on the edit link. And as you saw in preview, great, I've given the user to edit their information, but they cannot stop, as in they have no options to stop doing that. So I'm going to add a rule. So the first thing that you'll see here is a new tool. This is basically Blockly, where we can configure logic using different block groups, pretty much like a puzzle. If you are technical, you can also write your Groovy, which is the language used here, to configure a rule. But to make it easy for you, the first thing that you'll see here whenever you create a new precondition for a link is an if statement. So as I mentioned before, this link or preconditions basically validate if a link is available or not. So in other words, I need to validate if this edit link is available or not. So I basically need to say, if the user is blah, 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 then this link is available. In other words, I can say if the user is not in London, as in the user has to be in London for the user to continue, then this link is available. How do I actually build that logic? On the left-hand side, we can literally drag and drop. So we have different block groups. We've got logic, we've got an operator block, we've got an and or block, not block, true and false block. Math, you have multiple different options here. We've got text blocks where we can use to build logic. Lists as well. Variables, which basically reference the AVM, as I showed you earlier. We also have objects where we can interact, especially with APIs being returned. We can manipulate the data in this canvas that you can see here, and the object arrays, which is similar to object. But the most important thing now is that we need to stop this ending link from being available. So how do we do that? I'm going to drag a new block called the equals block, I call it. And then we're saying if something equals something, then the link is available. Or if something doesn't equal something, then the link is available. So my statement for this is if the user is not in London, or if my location is not equal to London, then the user will forever be stuck on the edit link until they are in London. So I'm going to have to drag a new text block so I can specify a string, and then I can enter a value. And it is case sensitive, and I'll show you how. Well, I'll show you why. And then one other block that's missing will be a reference to our ADM. And that will be in a variable section, which is the first block, which is a property block. We drag it to the left-hand side. We click on the block, and then as you can see, we have a reference to our ADM. Thankfully, it's pretty small. We don't need to search for it, so we just select it. And we are pretty much done. I do recommend to name your expressions so you can reference them later easily. So for this one, I'm going to say if user is not in London, then edit link. Oops, okay, I've got to stop there. Okay, if user is not in London, then link is available. In other words, if the user is not in London, then the link is available. Okay, oops, what happened there? All right, that shouldn't have happened, but let me see if I can search for it. Cool. We hit save, and then we'll see what happens next. Okay, so I'm currently on my create link because the create link appears before the edit link. So the user has to post the information first, and then I'm going to do London. We hit submit. Great. No edit link, nothing happens. We're pretty much done because we haven't got the step available. I'm going to restart. Weather lookup. Yeah, I need to restart my journey. So sometimes once you're done, if you can't see any more features, any more steps, then you do need to click on the yellow button to restart your session. So we could do it again. So weather lookup, get weather, which is our step. We enter our location, which is basically our post request. I'm going to do it in lowercase. Submit. But now the edit link is available because we basically said if the user is not in London, then this edit link is available, or show this edit link. We did enter London, but it was lowercase, so it has to be case sensitive depending on what you specified in your rule. I'm going to put different location. I'm going to put Sophia because, of course, we do have an excellent team in Sophia. I'm going to hit submit. Our edit link is still available because we've entered incorrect information. Once I enter London and hit submit with a capital L, we're now done. No more steps are available, so the journey is done. And that's pretty much how create links and edit links work in Journey Creator. So as a summary for that one, if you do not have, let me go back. If you do not have a create link, then yeah, your step wouldn't show. And if you only have an edit link rather than just a create link, your step will still not show because in order for it to show, it does need a create link. Cool. Before I continue, any questions?
Not so far.
Not so far. Okay, cool. All right. So I'm getting into the more interesting parts. So stay with me. um, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to create two new properties so we can actually begin the integration with our API that we'll be using, and that will be Open Weather Map. Okay. So I'm going to create a new property called app ID. And the reason why I'm creating this property here is because in order for us to sorry, I said that wrong. In order for us to connect to our API, we do need to provide an app ID. So we need to authenticate ourselves by providing this app ID. Yeah, I'm not going to show you the API now to avoid confusion, but we'll switch back to Journey Creator. Okay, so app ID will be a string because it's 32 digit or 32 character string containing numbers and letters. So I'm going to hit save now. And then because we have users from or team members from the States and elsewhere, I'm going to create an optional property called units. And then units is basically the choice between imperial, as in receiving results in imperial format or in metric format. So the weather results, which will be returned eventually, will either be in metric or imperial. Okay, units will be, of course, a string. We're going to explore creating a new object. We can even organize these properties. So I'm going to create a new object called request, because 1, 2, and 3 will be part of the request for our API. I'm going to hit save. To add existing properties into our object, you can probably guess it. We got to drag and then drop inside. It refreshes, we do the same, we do the same. And then we have a object with properties, which is pretty cool. Now to remove it, we just drag it. And as you can see, a gray curved box appears on the top. If you drag it to the left without dropping it inside this box, it's not going to work. That's basically an indicator where you need to drop it to remove it from the object. So I'll do that, and now my location is outside request. Since I want to do the opposite, I'm going to drag it back in. Cool, so now that we have our request object, let's preview again. Cool, so we've added 2 new properties, but we haven't seen these properties being reflected in our preview. The reason why is because we do need to, again, manually update our step because we have the option to. Once you add a new property to an object, it's not automatically reflected because we have the choice to add it to our step or not. So basically, we just need to update our step with these 2 new properties. So I'm going to hit edit, and then a shortcut for you, rather than dragging and dropping each individual property. Yeah, it may not even work. One thing you can do, if you want to drag the entire object, is literally dragging the entire object. So you get rid of it by highlighting the cross, and then we drag the entire object, and now we have a updated entity on our step. So now that when we preview, we should see the change. Cool. So we have our feature, weather lookup, we've got step, get weather, and now you can see we have my location, app ID for authentication, and units for the type of data being returned back. All right, so we basically created a new object, which will be the request that will be sent to Open Weather Map. Now, let me move back. So, let's see where we are. Cool. Now, let's make it a bit more realistic. On the right-hand side, what we can see is a dot notation reference to the model. If I was to preview this model, I'll show you exactly what I mean. If I was to preview it on the front end, so ignore what I'm doing now, but basically I'm going to connect Journey Creator to a front end client. So you can actually see a real live example of how the journey will look like on the front end. If you're giving demos or building an application, this is how it will look like on an iPad or on your mobile phone. Of course, there are no restrictions with this. Lumen, as in our client, could be implemented anywhere that supports Angular. So it's pretty flexible in that situation. But anyway, let's push this application to this front end so you can see it. All right, so I'm going to copy the environment URL. Ignore this bit, I'll get back into it later on. Then I'm going to move back to my code. Let me just quickly do this. Oops. Well, I'm just pretty much I've just previewed to see where we are, as in which application we are using. I've copied the reference, which is a URL, and then I've connected it by placing this URL in a front-end client called Lumen. And then once I hit refresh, you should see an application. Well, that's if it's actually a working application. Currently, our application is not working because we haven't finished building a viable application. In other words, what we just added isn't enough. As in, even though we've added one feature, one step, we've even added properties, still not enough. So how do we actually see our application, or what really defines a working application? You can pretty much say a working application is something that has data. I can agree with that only to a certain extent. With Lumen, in order for you to see your application in the front end, you do need to have certain requirements. So let's see where we are at the moment, and let's see where we need to get to. So we've built an application, cool. We've added one feature called weather lookup, fine. And we created a new step called get weather. We've even added a create link so the user can post information. We've even added a edit link so the user can edit that information. We've added a precondition to that edit link to avoid the user being stuck on that edit link if the information is incorrect. But one final area of our step is called UX configuration. And UX is clearly user experience, and this is where we configure the template for our front-end application. All right, so I'm going to hit edit, and then we will switch to UX configuration. Now, if you do remember, I selected the simple form, which is a basic form where we can configure. It's given us 3 options here. These 3 are strings. We have title, which is the title. So I'm going to give it a title. I'll call this one Get Weather for My Location. And I'm going to call the subtitle Open Weather Map. And then submit label will be next, and I'll explain why. And then we hit save. Now we have pretty much configured the 3 main areas of our step. Now I'm going to hit preview, and let's see if we can see the application. Nope, we still don't see the application. It doesn't mean I've connected to the wrong environment. It just means that we are still missing certain features. So we have a fully configured feature, but I mean, in the real world, we won't only have one feature in an application, as in the user wouldn't finish one feature and then they're done. There'll be multiple different features. For example, account. Once you're finished with your account, you move to delivery or checkout. Yeah, I mean, they'll be linked. In fact, I'll show you an example of a very large application that we are currently working on called House Kitchen. If you were on the call earlier, I did show you a brief look of it, but this is a very large application. What you're seeing here is called the application flow. In order to have a working application, we do need to have at least 2 features. A starting feature, and anything after that will complete the application. If I zoom out, this is pretty complex, but that just shows an example of how application flows can work in GenCreator. Okay, I'm going to switch back. I mean, pretty much here we've got over 20 different features, which is pretty massive. House Kitchen, if you wanted to know, House Kitchen is a combination between 3 different proof of concepts for clients that we have interacted with. So one of them will be with BT, and as you can see here, we have BB, which is broadband. Second one will be SIM only, that will be Dixon's car phone. That's another proof of concept that we've implemented in here. And the final one will be AT&T. Up stands for upgrade, so that's an upgrade journey. The reason why House Kitchen was built is to showcase the power of the platform. But yeah, it's just an example. I'm going to switch back to where we were. Not that one. Oops. Nope. Yeah. New start. So that's where we were. Okay, so weather lookup, get weather. Cool. So as I mentioned, in order for you to have a functional application, we do need to have another feature. We need to have at least 2 features. Starting position and then ending position. Cool. So I'm going to create a new feature called, okay, let's say, so we looked at the weather. What can we do with it? We can do pretty much anything with it. So I'm going to call this one response for now. Actually, I'm going to edit this. And by the way, we can't edit it through here. The way to edit a feature name is to edit it once you selected it. On the right-hand side, we have an edit button, and then we just re-edit the feature. I'll call this one weather response to be a bit more precise. Great. So I need to do exactly what I did in order for us to have a working feature. So I need to create a new step. And I'll call this one response. We can give it a simple form. By the way, giving it a step is optional, but I do recommend to give it a step, giving it a template. Sorry, let me start from the beginning. So assigning a template to a step is optional, but in order for you to have a viable application, I do recommend to assign every single step a template so that your application works properly on the front end. Okay, so we have our empty data profile. But before we create the response objects, I'm going to show you exactly what comes back. So I'm going to show you the API. We click on API here. We've got multiple different options. For now, what we want is the current weather data for a location. So we click on API docs, and we have a query. We have a call to api.openweathermap.org, and then we specify our location, which is our city name. We can even specify the country code, which is optional. I'll show you an example of what is returned. But yeah, this JSON object will be returned eventually through GenCreator, and then we can use that information. So we've got at least 9 or 10 different or multiple different properties here that we can choose for the response. But for now, I'm going to create a response object with only 4 properties. So that will be sunrise, sunset, temperature, and humidity. Cool. So I'm going to create a new object this time. And if you do remember, we can optionally create properties by itself and then move it into the object, or we can create a new object and then select that object and then select a new property, and then it will be automatically nested in the object. Cool. So we have, what was it? So temperature. Let's check what type of data it is. Okay, so temperature will be a number. So we select a number. So we're using a different type now. And then we have another property called humidity. I'm pretty sure they are all numbers. Let me quickly check. No, not that one. Oops. Yeah, so they're all numbers. Let me quickly do it. So humidity, number, sunrise will be a timestamp. So it will be not string, it will be a number. Sunset will be a number as well. All right, so we have our response object. So we created a new feature. We basically want to move this information here to the response. So I'm going to edit, and then we visit our ADM library. We move response to the left-hand side. We're not done because of course, we need to add a create link. Otherwise, the user will not see the step. So we just click on it, and then we're done. We can configure our template. We can call this one weather response. Submit will be done rather than next. Next was the first step. This is the last step. And the subtitle we'll leave as optional for now. We hit save. Okay, so if we do remember, we had a very large application flow that showed you. How do we view a flow, or how do we create a new application flow? So an application flow is required in order for you to see your application on Lumen. If you haven't got an application flow, you will never see your application. So let's build an application flow. All right, so we click on the application, of course, and then we hit edit. First thing we can see here, similar to how it looks in preview, we have our features. And these are our building blocks of our application. So we literally drag and drop weather lookup, then we drag and drop weather response. Now, to connect it, you hover to the right-hand side of the feature, you drag the line, and then, yeah, you just drop it on the left-hand side of where you want to connect it to. To remove a line, if you're not happy, you just made a mistake, or you just don't want it anymore, you just hover and then you select the very tiny cross button that appears to break your feature connection apart. All right, so I'm going to need it, so I'm going to connect it. But we're not done. By the way, throughout Journey Creator, you may see this orange toolbar at the bottom. It will give you hints on what's the issue. As we can see here, we've got two different errors. What does it say? One or more application flows does not have a defined start feature. All flows must have a start feature. Yeah, makes sense. So basically, Journey Creator doesn't know where you want to start. So we need to give it a starting point. And yeah, once we do that, it will define it as connected. So we click on our first feature, and then we literally choose the only checkbox on here, start feature. We hit save, and the errors are gone. Do we have a fully configurable, as in fully working application? I don't know, we'll see. So to see our changes, we hit preview. And then we can see our features, which is great. Oh, it's done it already. There you go. So this is how your application will look on the front end using our front end client called Lumen. We can see our properties in our request object. We've got my location, app ID, and units. When we hit next, we go and then we see our response. Done basically confirms that the journey is done, and then we will be sent to the first feature. So the journey will just restart. And that's pretty much how we connected it to the client. So a bit more technical, a bit more intermediate, which I'll cover next week. Sorry, not next week because I'm not in next week, the week after. But yeah, we've basically taken something called the app engine URL, which is the URL of the environment. In Lumen, as in our front-end client, There is a setting where we can specify the API to connect to. We've matched it. We've hit save and then it's refreshed. And now we can see a reference to our Journey Creator application on the front end. So that's how easy it is to connect to the front end. Now I'm going to show you the power of DXP here, or Journey Creator. Especially during demos, clients will be saying, how do we actually change it on the fly? To do that, I mean, I've pretty much done it, so I'll do it again. All we need to do to change the order, what if I wanted for some reason the response to come first rather than the request? That will never ever make sense in the real world, but it's just an example. To do that, we'll click on our application, we'll click edit, break it apart, we'll literally move it to the left, move the request to the right, connect it again, nope, because I've selected the start feature, deselect that, okay, and do it again, we click on that, make start, that's the shortcut, we connect it to the request, our errors are now gone, and then we hit save, and then we hit preview. We view it on the front end, and then we hit refresh. Cool, now our response is showing first. Now, that's how easy it is to literally reorganize a journey. Once you have the right things configured, I haven't really entered quite a lot of information to do that, but imagine doing that for a client. A very quick change could make a very big difference rather than going through a very legacy system. Lumen itself can be implemented as a package to any Angular client. Same way as Journey Creator could be accessed anywhere. So that just shows you the power of Journey Creator. Well, part of the power of Journey Creator. Cool. Now let me reorder it back to where it was, so it makes sense. We go back to our application, hit edit, break it apart, reorganize. Oops. What am I doing? Yeah, wrong one. Cool, so drag it from left to right, hit save, preview so we can see the change. Let's refresh it. Cool, back to where it was. All right, before I continue, any questions? No? All good? Making sense? Yeah? Okay, cool. All right, so moving back to Journey Creator. So as you notice, it's pretty ugly. What we have here are fields that a user can enter. But what if you wanted to add a label or a more prettier version for the user to see? User wouldn't really see or need to see hb.request.mylocation or hb.request.appid. This is basically saying that we need to add something called translations. Translations can be added to properties as in 1, 2, and 3. That way, we can change the labels on an application. So what we'll do now is explore another area of data editor called translations. Now, whenever you create a new translation, we do need to select the language. For example, I'm going to create a translation for the English language, but I'm going to choose the States. And then we can even make it a default language. So that basically means whenever you hit preview, it will be defaulted rather than giving you the option to choose between a language. It will just default towards English United States. We can even give it a description. We hit save. So how do we actually add or change these labels? As in hb.request.mylocation. All we need to do is select our new language that has been added, and then you'll take it to a new screen, which shows you a reference to your current translations. It was empty. You probably guessed it. We do need to select edit. Cool. So let's call this one, what is your location? App ID could be spaced apart. And then we've got units. We can give it capital units. Temperature as well could be translated. Same for the rest. Cool, done. Now, preview. Well, before I actually show you, I can show you on the front end, which is very straightforward. All I need to do is refresh the client, and we should be able to see it. No, okay. Now, the reason why we cannot see it is because it needs configuration. But I can show you how we can view translations in preview. So what we need to do now, because we have made a change, I'm going to say this quite a lot. Let's have a look. So we go through the journey now, but we do not see our translations. The reason why is because we haven't specified our new language. To do that, all you need to do is click on this new area here called the settings icon, where you can simulate the UI client. It's basically simulating what's going on here, as in the front end. I will select or toggle. We can choose a channel. I can get back into channels later on. But the most important thing here will be locale. We choose our new language that we just added, the states, we save and restart. Now we should see our translations in the back end. Cool, there you go. Rather than seeing the ugly dot notation, what we can see here is our labels that we've added as a translation. Cool. Now, that brings me on to the next topic here. If I refresh, okay, we're never going to see it. So again, a bit more intermediate, advanced with Lumen. I'm going to quickly edit something in the code so you can see the new language. Currently, there's no language selector, so I do need to specify the country code or the language code. When I do that, and when I hit refresh, you should see the difference. Cool. It's actually right under it. So we've got locale here. ENGB is English United Kingdom. I'm going to change it from ENGB to ENUS, United States. The reason why, or how do I know what to change it to? If I go back to translations, our code for our language is right there. So if I copy that, I don't need to, but yeah, you can copy that and then you go to your client. Once you hit save, we'll do a refresh and then we should see our United States translations on the front end. Cool, there you go. Okay, now I've just, well, I don't know if you caught it before, but I've literally selected next and it allowed me to go next, even without entering any data. In other words, there isn't no validation on here. So a user can enter whatever they want, as long as it's a string or a number or integer, the user can enter whatever they want and then hit save. So how do we actually make fields mandatory? How do we actually set minimum and maximum characters? How do we actually set regex, if wanted, on a feature, or you can say on a property? What we need to do now is view another area in Data Editor, but this time it'll be once you're editing your property. So one thing I didn't show you at the beginning was the other 3 tabs that are available to you for configuration while editing a new property. We'll do it with my location for now. So we'll do edit. And the first thing that you can see here is properties. So on the top, we've got properties. We've already explored that. So let's go to the next tab. We have privacy. Privacy or privacy, basically, we can specify the type of data classification for a property. Public basically means that it's publicly available, as in the user can literally see it on the journey. Confidential means that you can specify a mask. You can optionally specify a mask. For example, if it's to enter your password and you have an edit link for that password, so you can hide characters using the last 6 or the last 4. But yeah, you can choose between different masking options here for a property. There is no option for you to add your own masking at the moment, but that has been looked at. Scope is basically the type or the availability of your property in your journey. For example, for PCI compliance, if a user was entering card details, you wouldn't want to store that data. So for example, pass-through as an option, pass-through will basically allow the user to, or allow the application to not store the data once once a user has entered their card details, for example, in the journey. Rather than submitting it to the state or to the database, it just passes through. So it never completes, basically. In other words, that's just an option to help with compliance depending on the client. We even have different confidential classifications here. But yeah, this configuration is just for privacy on the property. Tags, we don't really use them at the moment, but they can be used similar to something called a UI hints, where you can give a tag or apply a tag to a property for a number of different reasons. So we can explore that later on. But the most important thing here, in order for you to add some sort of validation, will of course be validation. First and the most important thing here will be character length. This is a popular one. You can specify a minimum and maximum character length for a property. We have got, what have we got here? We've got my location, so we can say the user is only allowed to enter a minimum of 2 characters because they can enter their country code, for example, and still receive results. And then the maximum location will be 30 because some places have very long names, especially in Hawaii. List will be a reference to the ARD, which I briefly showed you earlier. Yeah, you can even give it a list. For example, my location could be a list of locations. I can even do that now just to show you. But yeah, it kind of defeats the whole purpose if I add a character length. So I want to do that now with this property. But what I'll do is I'll add a list to units so the user can choose from metric and imperial rather than entering that every single time they want to submit a request. Cool, so we'll do that now. All right, so let's not toggle that. And regular expression, regex, you can even specify patterns. You specify patterns through here, or you can specify in a setting area above. But you can also add regex patterns towards your property for validation, which is pretty cool. All right, so let's get rid of regex, and then we'll leave it as character length. I hit save, I hit preview. Cool, so let's see on the front end actually, it'll be better. What is your location? London. It's valid now because I have at least 2 characters. I've got 6 characters here. If I put 1 character and then deselect it, as you can see, we have a red error appearing. I mean, the error as in the label hasn't really been defined yet. We can define that now, but that just confirms that our property or our field is not valid. How do we get rid of hv.request.mylocation.error? You probably guessed it. We go back into translations. I'm going to click on edit. So rather than selecting, well, there's another drop down called label. Rather than selecting label, we have a choice between error, which is basically where we specify our error messages for the property. And we can also specify something called default, which is a default value that will be pre-populated once the step has first been visited. You can view default as a placeholder. So I'm going to select error. It's gone blank because we haven't added any error messages for default, so any error messages for our application. I've just entered the incorrect amount of characters, so I'm going to do minimum 2 characters, maximum, and a turbo error message, but just an example. Then we hit save, We hit preview. Refresh, and then now when I enter incorrect amount of characters, we should see an error messages, which looks a bit more prettier. But that's basically how you define error messages on the front end. So very easy, very quick, very interactive. Now, okay, so where are we? One of these fields or two of these fields are required in order to receive our response from our API, which we will tackle next. App ID and my location are required. I mean, obviously, because we won't receive a response if we don't have a location, and we definitely won't receive a response if we haven't connected or authenticated ourselves with the API. So how do we actually make a field mandatory? Rather than doing it in data editor, we do it actually on the step. And then we hit edit. Forget the right-hand side for now, but I'm going to select the actual object. But this time, when I highlight it and click on it, we have more options available here. This is related to HTML. Lumen, as in the preview, is integrated with Lumen. That's the reason why you can also see error messages on the back end as well, as in Journey Creator. But anyway, let's make it mandatory so that the user has to enter their location. Great thing about this, you can even add a validation to the validation, but you can even add a precondition which will validate if something is mandatory. So you can even say if the user has done this, then, sorry, if the user hasn't done this, then this field is mandatory. But yeah, you get the idea. If I add a new expression, we can even do that as well. So it basically validates and then it will define if the field is required or not. Cool. So we'll make mandatory. So we'll make my location mandatory, and we'll make app ID mandatory too. I'm going to hit save, and we'll hit preview. Where are we? Let's see. We'll refresh. There you go. Our asterisks have arrived, which basically means that I can't really skip it. I'm going to just enter units, see what happens. Yep, it's not going to let me continue because validation, well, it's not really valid. We do need to have some sort of information, and we also need to go by the validation on the actual field itself. So, yeah, valid. Cool. Now, let's make it super easy for the user. So I'm going to create a new list, which explores another area in data editor called ARD. I did briefly show you this earlier, but this is a great way to use something called reference data that will be referenced quite frequently throughout your application. Probably guessed it. We'll click on new list. We can call this one, let's call it units. We can even choose the type of data in our ARD, just as how we can choose it in the ADM. Add a value. We can call this one metric. And then the next one will be imperial. We hit save. But we're not done because we have to assign the way that we can use the ARD, the only way we can do that, there are multiple different ways actually, but the way to use it on a property is to select it in the property. If you saw earlier, I had to edit a property and then you click on validation. We just explored character length, but now let's toggle list. And it should give you a reference to what we just created because, I mean, that's pretty much the only thing in the ARD at the moment. We select it, we hit save. Let's preview to see what happens. We can do it on the back end this time. But now we have a drop-down list. So that's basically how you create drop-downs in your journey. So yeah, let's see on the front end. Yeah, same thing applies here. metric and period. So rather than the user entering that manually, they can easily select it and then they'll save the user a lot of time. Now, one thing that would definitely save the user a lot of time is not entering a 32-character app identification string. Now, we can still create a list for this, but another area or another tool that we can use is something called a constant. You may have saw it in data editor. We've got ADM ARD. We've got units now, but let's create a new constant. A constant is basically a value that wouldn't really change. It will be a string. And since I already have an account of, well, to give it more of a context, this one will be app ID. But since I already have an account with OpenWeatherMap, I'm going to copy the API ID into our constant and then apply it to our journey so that the user doesn't have to enter that every time they want to send a request. Cool. Where are we? Sign in. Oops. Choose. Yep. Submit. API keys. I'm going to copy this one. And then we add it to the value, hit save, and then we aren't done, of course. We do need to apply it. Now, applying constants to properties, slightly different. Rather than doing it in data editor, we have to do it in something called a business rule. So what are business rules? Business rules can be seen as services that you apply to your step. They are pretty much the most powerful aspect of Journey Creator. You can use a business rule for pretty much anything. And because we can pretty much use it for anything, Journey Creator can also be used for a whole number of clients. As in, whatever the situation is, they can probably use Journey Creator if they have to configure a journey. Cool. So let's add something called a business rule to our step. So what we're going to do here is apply the app ID to our journey. And the only way to do that now, as in if we are using a constant, is to use a business rule. So we select integration of rules. And then one thing we have done so far, which again you may have saw earlier, is add service. So we click on add service. We give it a name, and then we choose the service type. This time it will be business rule. I'll call this one use app ID constant. You can't do any spaces. It wasn't like that before. I do apologize. New rule. Cool. So as you've noticed, or you may have noticed, we have more options available here than the precondition because we have more flexibility when it comes to business rules. I'm basically going to say here, apply this app ID to this property, and then once the user hits submit, it will submit the app ID along with it. Cool. So let's call this one app ID. And I'm going to use a new block called set state. Again, you may remember when I hit preview, we have a section called state, and I'm basically going to set a value to the state so that we can use it in the rest of our journey. And we can choose our state property called app ID. That was a mistake. Let me switch it back. So we literally tap on the block, and then we have an option, which is a reference to our ADM. And then we choose where we want to set the state to. But we have one more block, which is missing. And this is where we specify the value. We can either specify the value with a string, or we can use another block called ARD, or choose an ARD. So we do that. Rather than entering a string, we can literally choose it from a drop down. App ID appears, we hit submit. Cool. All right, that may be a slight bug. Glad I recorded it. I'm glad this has been recorded. But yeah, we hit save. And then now, the user shouldn't need to enter information. Now, this obviously wouldn't be reflected because we haven't actually connected it to the API, but we can go a step further and hide the app ID field, because what we don't want the user to enter any information for app ID. So what's the point of actually showing it? I don't think there's any point anymore. So in order for us to hide a property from the user, all we need to do is select the property inside our step. For example, app ID is mandatory. We don't need a mandatory option anymore for this because it will be reflected in that business rule. But we can also do disabled, which basically means that the user will not be able to see it. Hidden and disabled work differently. They're all reflected towards HTML properties. Hit save, and then I'm going to hit preview. Cool. Now, so what we have here is a string where the user can enter the location. We've got units where the user can choose the type of data coming back. App ID is happening in the background because we've added a rule and a constant, so the user doesn't need to enter the app ID. This will all be prevalent once we actually connect to the API, which is exactly what we're going to do now. All right, so the most interesting part of this session. So finally, I'll take you to the third and final main area of Journey Creator called Integrate. Now, this is where we basically connect using our tools to any API that exposes itself to the public. Okay, so how do we do this? So before we do anything, actually, we need to create something called a service provider. What is a service provider? A service provider is basically a name that we associate with our services. So we have no service providers because we haven't created anything. Let's do that now. So we switch to service providers, we add a new one, and we can call this one weather. Oh, then let me be precise. Let's call it Open Weather Map. We hit save. All right, so we have our service provider. Now we can choose, and now we can start building our integration. So what is a service? Service is obviously something that will be used to return data from the API. And we can choose between SOAP and REST. We can choose between XML and JSON. By the moment, this is the current configuration. If it is a secure API, then it will be HTTPS. If it's not secure, then it will be HTTP. These will be configurable as well. We don't need to configure this actually because this is based on the test. If a API requires basic authentication, we can also add that here too. So let's see what type of API we are dealing with, and we can do that by viewing our response. So we have a query, and this is a query. No, what we have here is a query parameter list. So we have query parameters available. So we need to send parameters. And then once we do that, we get a response. And based on the response, this is JSON, confirming that this is a REST API. Now, let me go back, API docs, and then this is our tool that we'll be using to connect to the API. So we need to configure literally all of that inside Journey Creator so we can receive a response. Let's do that now. So the first thing that we'll need to do, we'll distinguish that it's REST. Based on this URL, I don't see any HTTP, do we? Let's see. Okay, so I'm assuming this is HTTP rather than HTTPS because of our core URL here. So let's see what will happen. So yeah, we hit save, but can't do that. Obviously, we need to give it a name. So let's call this one get current weather. Now that we have our service, we need to add an invocation. Invocation is basically the type of request We can choose between a post request, get request. Very soon it will have a put request and delete request. But for now, we only have get and post requests for REST. So we'll give it a name, and then we can call it call. No. Let's call it post weather info. It'll be a get request. No, let me not confuse you guys. Get weather. Let's call it that. So it will be a get request because we're doing a get request in a browser to receive the response. If it was a post request, then we'll be sending information as in another format. But we can't hit save because we need to configure an endpoint. So yeah, we need to unfortunately start again here. So we need to create that endpoint. What is an endpoint? Of course, an endpoint will be just pretty much anything after the host. So it will be /data.2.5 /weather. So we need to configure that in the endpoint category. Endpoints will be in authentication. Open weather map, we just choose our service provider. And then we add new. We'll call this one get weather. Our host will be api.openweathermap.org. Our port will be 80 because this isn't secure. And our operation URL will be whatever is after our host, as in our endpoint. Let's see. Cool. So we've configured pretty much, we've broken down the URL to different parts. And 1, 2, 3 has been configured so we can add our new service. Now that we've added a endpoint, we can add an invocation. So we go back to our provider. Oops, not there, apologies. We go back to our service, add invocation. It'll be a get request, get current weather API, for example. At the moment, we have synchronous as a pattern. Async isn't supported yet, if you are familiar with that term. But now that we have an endpoint, we can choose it. We hit save. And we aren't done. As I mentioned before, we have the option to add stuff to our step. It wouldn't be added by default. So what we need to do next is add a service to our step so that we can call this service on our get weather step. Once we do that, we will eventually receive a response confirming that we built a working application. One more step needs to be done here. Now, as a recap, we've pretty much done quite a lot of stuff today. I know we're almost done. We've got 20 more minutes left. One can say an application isn't fully built or you haven't fully explored Journey Creator until you've integrated with an API. We are almost done here. So I'm going to take it to another tool, which is a very, very powerful tool called Data Mapper. And this is where we actually select which data we want to send as a response. And where we also select which data we want to send, we want to receive. Sorry, I said that completely wrong. We select what data we want to send as a request, and then we select which data we want to receive as a response. We could do this by using a visual tool called Data Mapper. So we click Map Data. So from the beginning, services, our services here. We choose our invocation. The button that appears, meaning that we can edit or map data. The first one will be a response because with every single request, you will get a response, but we can choose the type of request that will be sent. We are using query parameters. So we'll be sending a request params object. What is that? We have a choice between request and request params, depending on the situation. And because we are sending parameters in the URL, we'll be using request params. if we were sending a request body, we'll be using the request mapping. We hit add, and then now we edit. So on the left-hand side, this is basically what we'll be sending as a request to the API. Now, the output will be what we map to, which is basically the JSON model for the request. We need to actually build that. It will be dependent on any situation. Luckily, our one is very simple. So I've already created a JSON file which maps the request that will be sent to OpenWeatherMap, and I'll do the complete same thing for the response, just to show you how data mapping really works and to show you how it's very powerful and how we can use it between REST and XML. So I'll select the file and I'll visit or find that JSON file. So it'll be in web service. Okay, we import that file. And as you can see here, 1, 2, and 3, so query app ID units will be sent in this URL. So we've got app ID, we can have query, and oops, we can have query, and then we can also have units as well. All right, so the hardest part, what needs to be done here? So Victoria, if you're, are you on? Yeah.
We have to map them, I mean to link them with each other.
Yeah, so can you tell me where my location needs to be mapped to?
My location is Q.
Q, okay. So Q is basically query.
Yeah. App ID is app ID, and units, it's again units. Yeah.
Cool. And that's
Yay!
yeah.
That was very hard.
But yeah, that's how easy it is to map data, basically. So now that we map the request, we'll do exactly the same for the response. So we map data, and then we click on response. Now, where do I get this information from? It's asking me to upload a JSON file. What I basically did is copy the response from here, which is the response from the actual API. I saved it as a JSON file, and all you need to do is upload it. So I'll do the same, and then we have it here, predefined, import, and I will see exactly the same thing as what you see here on here. And that's basically how we can take information from the response and map it to our model. Cool. So I'm going to map these 4 properties. And they're pretty much all here. Well, most of them. So temperature, or temp to temperature, humidity to humidity. Sunrise will be in a different object, not a problem. We map sunrise to sunrise and sunset to sunset. We hit save. And then we're pretty much done actually. We've finished our service, we've mapped it, we've created our invocation, we've added an endpoint. We've done that in pretty much 10 minutes or even less if you're pretty much familiar with the tool. But yeah, very simple integration. Let's see it work. But before I do that, I need to add it to our step. So the final part is adding it to the step. We always, of course, we can probably guess when we need to add it, but we need to add it to the request. So on submission, as in on the user posting something, the service will be executed, as in once the user has posted their location, this API call will be executed. So let's create a new API call. And then we should see the response in our response object. And then to make it more realistic, I'll do this on the front end. Then I'll switch to the back end to see what's happening behind the scenes. So we edit our request step, I can call it. It'll be on the create link because this step will be, this service will be executed once the user has posted something. So we add it to the create link. We can call this one get weather. and then we choose from the API call. So we had three different options. If you do remember, on the top, I chose the business rule, and now we're going to choose API call. We choose our service provider, we choose a service that we just created, which is our invocation, depending on the situation. We'll do a GET request, so we choose get current weather API, and then we hit save. We can even reorder our services as well. So it wouldn't make sense to put app ID constant after, because we need to send that information before we connect to our service. So let me move it back. But we can also reorder it by selecting the three dashes on the left-hand side. Okay, I'm going to hit save. Preview, so we can push the change. Weather lookup. Now, app ID isn't there because we've hidden it, but we've also specified the app ID on a rule, so it should exist, as in we should receive a response. Now the user can choose between a drop-down. We've got metric and imperial. But this is the fun part. I'm going to choose a completely random location, and I'll see what the current temperature is or humidity is in that area. Okay, so I've got a few here actually. Let's choose Malaga in Spain. And then use a metric. We can view the state to see what's going on, as in the response. So, moment of truth, we have a configured application. Once I hit submit, we should finally receive a response from the API. So let's see what will happen. We hit submit. Cool, there you go, no errors. As you can see, the first thing we have here is our request object. We have our app ID. We didn't enter it, but it has been added by our business rule that we created earlier, and that has been submitted as part of the request. My location is Malaga, units was metric, but under that, in our response JSON, or our state JSON, we can see 4 new properties, or should I say 4 new values. We've got humidity as an 88, as an 88%. We've got the sunrise and the sunset as timestamps, and currently, is 17.48 degrees Celsius in Malaga. So, to prove this works, Victoria, do you know your current temperature in Bulgaria?
Let me check. It's give me a second. 9 degrees.
9 degrees?
Yeah.
Okay, I like it. Let's start the journey. Oh, my mask has been applied, so that's a bit awkward. I do need to remove that. But let's restart the journey. Get weather. We'll do Sofia. We can even do Sofia and the country. Oh, actually, let's just do Sofia. And then we'll choose metric, submit. And in Sofia, pretty close. We've got different API systems here, so it may be a bit different, but they are pretty similar. On here, it says that it's 8.15 degrees Celsius. So that basically confirms that we've connected to an API. We created an application, which is very basic. It didn't really take that long. The more you use the platform, the more easier it will get, the more stuff will make sense. But yeah, that's pretty much it at that point. When I come back from holiday, it'll be a week after, we'll go over more intermediate advanced topics. We'll do it each other week. But for now, any questions so far?
No, I guess so.
Cool. It's always great to hear.
It was quite a good explanation and useful training, Luis.
Cool, thank you very much. Yeah, I can continue because we only got 9 minutes, but I'll leave it here. So yeah, as a summary, with what we've done today, as a recap, we've literally created a new application inside our project called DXP Training. We created 2 new features so we can have a functional application. We've seen how it will look on the front end using Lumen. In fact, let me quickly run through the journey. So we enter Washington in America, Imperial, because they use the Imperial system. We hit next. And then what we get is a temperature of 64.4 Fahrenheit. But yeah, we've connected it to the front end to see how we can connect between Journey Creator and a front end client. We've added translations, we've added multiple different things. But yeah, there is still more to explore with Journey Creator. But this is basically the summary of the basics of using the platform. So yeah, this will be recorded, or it's currently being recorded. Once it's done, I will send it to you. I don't think I can send it to you today, but once I get back, I can post it.
No worries.
Yeah, glad you enjoyed it. Any questions, please email me or Slack me. But yeah, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Fred.
Bye, Luis.
Bye.
Просто дробный.